Can you hear
Test
me?
one, test,
You can hear
test.
me?
Testing, testing.
Testing? Yeah. So we are continuing the study session on the Unified Development Code. We've obviously brought several of these packets to you over the last few work study meetings to review and give you an opportunity to ask questions in advance of considering this at a public meeting in June. Right now the plan is we're having a special planning commission tomorrow night to have a second public hearing just to take testimony on the revisions that were made as a result of public comments, and so we're taking limited public testimony on those changes and how they affect the unified code, just to make sure that everyone has a chance to comment on those. We will then have the meeting on June 13th, where, as I understand it, we're going to we will accept testimony. It's just a public meeting, and we'll take testimony from anyone who wants to comment on this project. And then the proposed adoption is for June 27th. You should have found in your packet at the end of this section a comment matrix, which I think is approaching 50 pages in terms of all the changes that have been made. This started out as a public comment matrix where all the public testimony received within the 60-day period and from other outside agencies was compiled. And then as we started reviewing those comments, we'd find little things here and there. And then we also realized that when we released the draft, somehow the definitions chapter had not been fully integrated into the released draft, and we had to actually go through all of our old definitions and the definitions that Sarah Springer had written and reconcile them, which was a huge task. And so we've tried to make sense of that in the matrix by explaining what changes have been made, other little things that we've noticed. We've also tried to document so that people can actually see what's happened since this was released for public comment in February. But tonight we are going to talk about the subtitle 5, which is the subdivision regulations. It includes the administration and enforcement, boundary line adjustment, short subdivisions, subdivisions, final plats, binding site plans, vacation and alteration of plats, improvements, and then the design guidelines chapter. And then we also provided the revised definitions chapter, which is quite lengthy and includes mostly definitions moved from Title 16 into that chapter. But it's sort of what ties all of the code together.
I just had one definition question.
Yes.
Because I don't remember in the rest of the code, but we have a definition for elderly person, which is 62 and a half, and then we have a definition for a senior citizen, which is 55. And I didn't know if we needed both of those, because I didn't know if we referred to elderly at some point in our code and senior at another point in our code.
That is a good question. I will double check that.
Do you want to stay with definitions for a moment then?
Yeah, we can absolutely talk about definitions.
Well, so going back to public comments, I think it would be helpful for me if comment matrix could be sorted by chapter, so you're not having to bounce back and forth. If it could be more linear, that would help me. As opposed to by comment. Right.
In some cases, the comments actually covered multiple sections, and so you might have, if somebody pointed out an inconsistency between one and the other, I'm not quite sure how we would figure that out, but we could generally try to arrange it in order, or we could move all the things that cover multiple sections to the bottom.
If it's too much work, I don't want to make work. I can actually go back and forth.
Okay. I'll look into it though and see if there's a better way we can present it. Although I don't want to confuse anybody who's already started reviewing it as well.
Right. So one of my questions was, and it was addressed, I think, in a memo with definitions. Are all of these terms used that we've got here?
So we went through far as we can tell, yes. We actually identified about 35 words that we had defined that appeared nowhere in our code, and so we deleted those. We had a whole list of words that we suspected weren't used, and we found that some of them did appear in one obscure place or another, but it is definitely appearing like over the years, codes have been repealed without actually going through the definitions to figure out what definitions also needed to be repealed, and so I think it was a good exercise to go through that. But we generally have searched all of the documents just doing a word search for the defined term and verified that it is in there, and so it's possible we missed one or two, but I think we pretty well covered it.
And so what happens if somebody has a question about a definition that's not in here?
I believe that, I mean, it's going to have its plain dictionary meaning, or they can apply for a interpretation.
Okay.
The state law requires us to have a code interpretation provision so that they can get a firm decision on something like that.
I've seen other code where it says if there's not a definition, they go to a specific Webster's collegiate dictionary for that, so it calls out the latest edition or something like that. That's something to think about. But I had some stuff that, I don't know if we need to take up the time here, and I can certainly go through with you later on, just some minor stuff.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm happy to try to answer some of those. And I know that you also submitted written comments, which I haven't been able to go through in advance of tonight's meeting.
Sure.
This was the planning commission tomorrow night.
Correct.
Okay.
So anything that changes at this point will be council amendments to the planning commission recommendation.
Right. And the definition of family, that's obviously been legally vetted. I know that can be a controversial definition.
I think it is a controversial definition, and we're not proposing to change that. That's sort of a legacy thing from our old code that is more part of the zoning update, more so than the permit procedures. Most of these definitions relate to codes that we're not changing as opposed to the codes that we are changing. They're just moving from one place to another.
Okay, I got some stuff we'll talk about later tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, so, in any event, I think, the subdivision provisions have been extensively discussed solely because they've been part of the interim revisions that have been in place for the better part of 2 years. And so we've tried to explain in our staff report how the code is different than what previously existed prior to the interim code adoption. In a lot of cases, what's in the unified code is similar to what's in our interim regulations, although it did go through the Development Regulations Committee, and in some cases we were able to make some changes to make things more to that group's liking, and in other cases there were legal reasons why those changes were not made. But we did listen to testimony about those things, and I can tell you at the end of that process, the main issue is still whether we require approval for boundary line adjustments or not, and that's just a philosophical difference that council has to make a decision on. I will tell you that the county actually called and asked for a copy of what we were proposing, and they're reopening that so that they will adopt boundary line adjustments as well. And so it seems that they recognize the need for this and are going to try not to be the last jurisdiction in the county who doesn't require approval of them. But I think we're going to beat them to it.
We're going to deflect for you.
All right. Yeah, I think the testimony is going to come to you. So the boundary line adjustment provision was controversial, and the reason was really simple, but I think that we've done a pretty good job of explaining why you would want to have an approved boundary line adjustment. That just relates to future buyers of property. If they're buying property that was adjusted, they want a determination from the jurisdiction saying that was a legal lot, and they have certainty that what they're buying is something that can be developed. I think that was the exact reason the county gave me today when I asked them why they were looking at this.
And there's some pretty horrible examples. In most cases, it's done right 99% of the time. But when it's not done right, then somebody's stuck holding the bag with
we had a boundary line adjustment where somebody was trying to adjust their line so that one lot would have all of the critical areas on it, and the other lot would be all of the buildable land. And the critical areas lot, because we are required to offer a reasonable use exemption, if we would have allowed that to be created, we would have had to allow them to fill a portion of the wetland to build on it, because otherwise they would have been deprived of the property right associated with that lot. And so that's another part of this review. As far as short subdivisions go,
Can we go back to BLAs for a moment?
oh yeah, sure.
Is there a way that the city could not require a review of those BLAs or simply moving a lot line because of an encroachment, a driveway or a shed or something like that? Because that would certainly take the heat off of those who are really coming in to use that as it was originally intended for by Mercy Everett.
I don't know of a way to do that. I think the real issue is in those situations, you very well may be creating a nonconformity, and so how do you ensure that the result of a boundary line adjustment is two lots that are no more nonconforming or are conforming? And it's hard to have that assurance, and I think buyers also want that assurance that they haven't done something that creates a nonconformity, where that's going to affect their ability to redevelop the property in the future, or
Many times it's the person that is doing it doesn't care, but it's the person that inherits it down the road that discovers they've accepted somebody else's problem that they didn't know they accepted.
It's the most common way for a BLA not to be, where do they normally go sideways?
what do you mean, where do they go sideways?
Where you said that you would use the BLA tool, non-conformities created, what's the most common way that happens?
Well, I think it's usually going to be a change in regulation that occurs after that's been done, but because they never had a decision from the city saying that what they did was legal or granting that approval, they don't have any status, they don't have any legal status because they recorded something. You get legal status for that type of action because the city has given you a written decision or an approval. And so I think that's where people run into problems, is they need a decision from the city stating that the action taken has been approved, and then they can hold that in their hand and say, I have an approved adjustment. And
That makes sense. So you in essence vested because at that time we've approved whatever that variance is or action is, and then later on, regulations change, code changes, and if you didn't have that check-in with the city to vest what you did, you're kind of in limbo because
we're determining that you're a legal lot of record by issuing that decision. And so both of the lots involved in the adjustment are legal lots of record. And as a legal lot of record, you can develop that even if it's not a non-conforming lot. But if it's not a legal lot of record because it wasn't, because it was adjusted without going through either a subdivision or some other approval process, then they have potential problems.
So I went through it, and if anybody's interested in the meat of it, it's 20.84.040D, 2D. So it's 20.84.040.2D. And if you look through that checklist, ask yourself if those are reasonable requirements. And I went through them and said, well, okay.
Would you?
61.
So it's 20.84.040.2D. And when you go through
Yeah,
those,
I'm in Brooklyn.
yeah, you ask yourself if that's reasonable, and a BL shall not result in creation of an additional lot. Well, that makes sense. So I think for us, I think that's really the meat of the matter, and I looked at it and thought all of those made sense.
just one element on page 53.
What's the code site on that?
It's chapter 2080, and the item I'm wanting to talk about is under applicability, and it's item 4.
2080.
It says all contiguous lands shall be included in the plat application. And at the end, it says the applicant shall certify that they have included all the contiguous land in the plat application, and they do not own otherwise have legal interest in ownership of contiguous parcels. I get that, but my concern, and what I want to know is in here, because I didn't see it, is where we have a situation like we did, and it wasn't Flower Meadows, but it was in that same area, where a developer would come in and take a parcel they had and put maybe half a dozen homes on it. And then their other lot wasn't necessarily contiguous with that. It was maybe just off a little bit. And they would put another one in. So what we ended up with was 3 or 4 little subdivisions up there that they didn't have to, none of their like traffic counts or anything,
Wasn't big enough to trigger.
wasn't big enough to trigger anything, but collectively it would have. And I think that's what this is speaking to, but I'm not sure that it does completely. I think John and Rob are very familiar with the area up there.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that addresses it. And I thought the short plat chapter also has a provision on doing an additional short plat within 5 years of the initial one.
5 years is too short, too long.
Let's use a BLA to move it out.
5 years is standard.
It's a standard, yeah. So I guess the other really contentious issue that we had a lot of back and forth on was criminal versus civil penalties with regard to all code sections, not just the subdivision code. And I think Doug provided a pretty eloquent response in the matrix that was also shared with the people who submitted the comments on this, and that, you know, I think there's a much higher burden for the city to prove a criminal charge, and so in most cases, things are going to be civil, but we have to have the criminal tool in the toolbox for really difficult cases or where money isn't something that concerns the individual committing a violation. If they have the money to pay civil fines and it doesn't bother them,
Or
sometimes you need a,
corporation, they don't,
Yeah.
they're not subject to it.
yeah, so it's, I think that explanation in the code is very clear, although we heard that a lot from various people that they didn't want to get in trouble because they recorded something incorrectly, and I don't think that's the intent. It's really, the criminal charge is really reserved for much bigger offenders. We did take things from a gross misdemeanor to a misdemeanor, which is about a fifth of the fine and a significantly lesser potential jail term if it ever came to that.
What section is that?
That is in administration and enforcement.
So I flag that, and other than the change from gross misdemeanor to misdemeanor, were there other changes to that?
Let me get there real quick.
The other thing you might want to have in our hip pocket for the public, because this is something that I think people talk about a lot all over, is how different is this proposed from what exists today? How often is it used, and are people really worrying about something that
Yeah.
doesn't occur that often? And I think that's part of the message, really.
Yeah, I don't know that we've actually ever filed even a civil penalty under our subdivision code. We've never had to. We've written a few nasty letters over the years because somebody recorded something that they shouldn't have, and they have worked to remedy it, or we put them on notice that what they did is not a legally recognized, a legal lot of record. But other than that, we really haven't had to use it unless I think there are other violations that potentially come out of the zoning code related to doing work without permits or other things of that nature, but under subdivisions, it's very seldom used. And as far as what's in our code now, our code has existed prior to the interim ordinances, and there's probably still some remnants of this. We actually have penalties that are inconsistent with the type of charge that can be filed. I think it says gross misdemeanor, but then it has a charge that's more than what's authorized. Or I forget exactly what the inconsistency was, but it was kind of a mess in terms of confusing civil versus criminal. So that is being clearly defined here. If we can move on to short subdivisions, you know, the main comment that we heard here was expand your threshold from 4 to 9 lots, which the county does allow for a 9-lot short plat as opposed to a 4-lot short plat, which is the statutory limit, which has a flexible threshold that can be increased. And I've said to the development community, and I'll say to you, I think that we should support going to 9 lots in the future, but until we have our zoning sorted out and our development standards sorted out, I don't think that we should be taking things through an administrative process without those safeguards in place to ensure that things aren't getting missed or that the public doesn't have an opportunity to comment on projects where the development standards may not be as robust as they ought to be.
So the comment, the significant comment I had in this chapter was about bonding for improvements. And I don't know, you probably haven't had a chance to look my comments yet, but I don't know how wise it is to allow a developer to bond for those items that would be considered safety improvements. So guardrails, sidewalks, those kinds of things that you'd want to have up front and not allow them to put off to the very end.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that this was changed, and Jim, one of our associate planners, pointed out that any bond approval is an agreement, and that I believe those have to go to city, even though it's a short plat, the bond agreement has to go to city council, and so city council would get to weigh in on whether or not we approve that agreement. And so there's an extra level of safeguard there, but just because we do allow bonds doesn't mean that we will allow bonds without making minimum safety improvements for a project.
Right, I think it'd be nice to call that out so that we're not put in the position of having to deny a bonding request because they have safety items in there.
Which section was that again?
So there's a couple sections, 2086, 110, and then 140 as well.
Does it specifically refer to public safety? I'm not seeing that.
So the last sentence is 110, in lieu of construction, subdivider may submit a bond pursuant to chapter 2096. And my comment was unless for items considered necessary for safety.
Okay.
And
Yeah, we can, and that's in your comments you sent to me already?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think that's an unreasonable requirement. It still requires an interpretation of what is required for public safety, so.
Well, I think we could list those items now. Potentially.
And then as far as the rest of the subdivision chapter, I don't think there was a whole lot of comments one way or another. The design guidelines chapter, I remember hearing that people didn't like that, but they didn't realize that that's what's in our code now and we weren't changing it. It's something that we need to address in the future. And it was also where we were going to put the single-family design standards, but we've now removed those from the unified code and we'll take those on a separate track. The binding site plans, I think I mentioned when we talked about vested rights that we are allowing people to vest through a binding site plan application, and so our vesting chapter and the binding site plan chapter make reference to that vesting, and that's something that we're doing that's very generous to allow people to record their binding site plan and build in accordance with that plan weren't used anywhere. We also found terms that were defined in multiple chapters that in the critical areas code it read one way, in the shoreline master program it was another, in the traffic impact fee concurrency chapter it was another definition, and so we had to look at all of those, figure out where each one was listed in the code, and try to figure out what definition worked the best for the city's purposes. And in some cases, we even had to redefine terms because we realized that what we had was problematic or maybe was adopted at one point in time, and then a subsequent code amendment came along, and when that definition combined with a subsequent code amendment are combined, you have either a huge loophole or some sort of inconsistency in the code, and we've tried to fix those where we've found them, and I can assure you we have not found them all, but I would expect that over time as we start using the new code, we'll keep a list of things that need to be updated, and we'll bring back those sort of housekeeping items in the future. So I think that sums up my subtitle 5 in the definitions chapter summary, unless there's any further questions, which I'm happy to help with. And if you have any comments between now and when do you leave on vacation? I prefer to have them before Sharon goes on vacation, so that we're going to try to have the ordinance drafted and online around the time that Sharon leaves, so that the public can see what they're going to be able to comment on at the June 13th meeting. So look forward to presenting that then.
Number one,
I think we're done with number 1.
and one other concern by number 2, and I just wanted to just share with you that, just share with me that the governor signed the transportation budget today. At our city hall. And didn't notice this is to keep our eye on the ball. So I got that from Berger Abraham, next week now of Tremont, so that keep an eye on that. So, with that, let's do our real number 2, which is single family residence standards. History reference page 159 of your packet.
And actually, I'm going to pass out. What I realized happened, when we took this out of the Unified Development Code, we realized that the numbering was wrong, yet somehow we still sent you the old numbering, and the version that you had at the last meeting that you commented on had numbering that's different than what went out in your packet tonight. And so I wanted to pass out the numbering that you previously saw. The language is no different, it's just there's a little bit too much going on when you're taking these things through the Planning Commission and the City Council at the same time. And then we also put together a comment matrix. Council members Diener and Ashby submitted written comments on the design guidelines, and we've tried to provide responses to those. And so I wanted to, I figured that would be a good place to start our discussion, would be to go through some of those comments and then see what additional comments exist and try to refine this proposal a little bit to accomplish your goals. I would have liked to have had this in the packet, but I worked on it this weekend, and I was still working on it at about 4:30 today, trying to get this and other things ready for tonight's meeting. So the first half of the matrix are Councilmember Ashby's comments, and then followed by Councilmember Diener's comments, and they are in chronological order of how the code sections are numbered, so we can kind of walk through this. The first comment that we received was why garages and carports need to be set back 5 feet behind the front wall of the house. And the response that we provided was that our goal is to de-emphasize the garage, and you're not universally required to meet that setback, but in order to come closer to the street, you have to do other things to enhance the appearance of the house in one way or another. And so this is one of several ways to accomplish the goal of de-emphasizing a garage as an architectural feature.
Just like to back up to this very first section. You and I discussed this applicability and this very, one of the concerns I had was an existing footprint. I don't think we should be moving somebody's,
Correct.
House, just because the garage is 5 feet, and it's non-conforming, and they're triggering this 50% threshold,
next section is exceptions. And so all of the exceptions allow you to deviate from the standard that's in A.
If you want that garage closer, you gotta
Right.
do one of these things. I'm not saying you can't, but we don't want you to, but if you have to, here's how you can go about it.
Yeah, I guess just what I just want to say up front is I'm opposed to most of the language in here. And I find it very frustrating. And, yeah, I do. I have a real knee-jerk reaction to it. And part of it is, I don't understand why we have to do all that. I think, I'll just say it, I think that we have created some guidelines here that are in excess of the problem we're trying to solve. And I guess I also need to understand what the problem is we're trying to solve. I walk through McCormick Woods on a regular basis, and I look at some of these things in here, and some of those homes don't meet these guidelines. My home could not be built with these guidelines. I mean, I would have to change my home in order to be, had I built now with these guidelines, I could not build my home the way it is today. So I take a little bit of exception to that. I understand that now. I was trying to think, what is the difference? And the difference, in my opinion, basically is size of lots. Is because these things by themselves are okay when they're on a larger lot. But when you put them on one of these smaller lots, that's when some of these elements become more pronounced, such as the garage doors right up there.
Or all you see is the side of a garage.
Correct. So,
We're shoehorning houses in on side streets.
right, so I'm just wondering, is this too much for the problem we're actually trying to solve?
And most of the builders out there aren't a problem. Unfortunately, there's a segment of the builders out there that are doing what they're referring to as affordable housing. They say that's the only way they can do it, is to do crack. And I don't know that, I hope this isn't gonna prevent affordable housing, but I don't want some of the stuff I'm seeing out there with backwards fences and backs of garages facing arterial streets.
Right, so if there's a few of those issues that we can address, that's fine. One of my concerns is if we put a lot of these guidelines in effect and the builder cannot build the affordable home, you're gonna find a manufactured home there instead.
These apply to manufactured homes as well. But what I was going to say is I agree that the narrow lot, the smaller lot is a part of this, but it's a smaller lot combined with a consumer demand for a front-loading garage, a two-car front-loading garage that is the issue, because all the lots in the old part of downtown where you see houses that have a human scale architecture are built on the same width of lot as what's going in at McCormick Woods. The difference is that they were designed for people who had one car for a family and maybe didn't even have off-street parking because there was plenty of room on the street. And it's hard to, you could try to apply this to only lots that are, less than 8,000 square feet, or pick some number and say that on small lots this applies, or on small lots with two cars this applies, because I agree when you're on a half an acre lot at McCormick Woods, it's probably not as big of a deal because you're going to be tucked away in the woods and not bothering anybody. But there's no perfect way to write these sort of standards. I haven't seen anybody tackle single family design standards in a way that is just great, or I think everybody would be doing it. It's really trying to balance a whole bunch of competing factors and to get something that is going to affect where most of your development is occurring, which currently is in Indazio Village, Blueberry, Horseman Heights and at McCormick, which even in McCormick Woods, they're not building the same big houses that they used to build. They're building much smaller lots on parcel D, and also their plans for McCormick North are going to be more of the small lots, and I think that's where you're going to see, 85–90% of your development in the coming years. So I don't know how to write something that is going to address those places without also affecting the little pockets of infill development that are available around downtown.
So you said that it's a handful of builders that are kind of creating the need for this. Does that mean then that the other builders are okay with this? Have you heard from them?
McCormick has reviewed this and is okay with it. They've run it through, they actually hired a consultant to work on this with us. They had presented their own guidelines, realized that it wasn't something we could enforce because they would have to do it through their HOA, the way that they were written, and they said, if you change a handful of things in yours, they're totally tolerable and you shouldn't have a problem.
The realtors and the builders have had this.
Since November, I think.
And they've just kind of taken a wait-and-see approach. I think there's some things in here that are open to talk to, in particular. We've got slope lots in here, and in page 12, the need to, build a footing for your fence because your lot sloped, and it's probably over the top. But I do see the need where I don't want to see the back, or on our arterial streets, I don't want to see the maintenance side of a fence built. That belongs on the inside,
I saw this as the antidote to some of the infill nightmares that we've seen, that people got away with because we lacked something like this. So this is not a new.
and when I approach the worst offenders, they don't care. They just flat don't care. I tried to appeal to their sensibility, and
They don't care if we do this,
No,
or
they
they
don't
don't care with
care.
the quality of their home, right?
Correct.
Okay.
they just, that's what the market's demanding, and that's what I'm selling. And I asked about the fence, that's the way they want, the homeowner wanted it built.
So one of my comments was about this rubbing up against the affordable housing issues. Is there a way to find out what this does to the purchase cost of a home? It might be really difficult, but are we talking about 1%, 2, 5?
I mean, the fence, are we talking,
Well,
if the
the
homeowner wanted on one,
fencing side.
$100 bill, he put wood on the other side of the fence. I mean, I don't think it's, that aspect of it isn't, I don't think astronomical to throw a window. We're asking, put a window on the garage or some sort of a decorative treatment on it. I mean, a window's $250, I don't, or don't build the garage facing the street that way. If that's so, if you want to maximize the density, and that's the only way you can do it, I mean, they're realizing additional lots, that's why they want to do it, and getting a better profit for their project. If they're gonna do that, then they ought to have to put a couple $1,000 back in to make that house, in particular, that faces the arterial street, look nice. Between those two houses, I don't care what the side of the garage looks like. Hopefully those two homeowners do, but when the rest of us drive through town, we ought to have a nice streetscape. And that's what this is about to me.
And I imagine the standards in Pierce County, like Gig Harbor, are much, much higher. I said, I imagine the standards in surrounding counties, like Pierce County, are much higher. Gig Harbor. And that makes for a more appealing community.
think a lot of the suggestions, you'll see that we said, yes, this is a change that we can make, and we can incorporate that if everybody agrees, but, I think, you know, maybe studying the comments that have been received so far and, you know, thinking about those would be in order, or it could go back to a committee and,
You know, we've been at this since November. I'm fine with relaxing this. I mean, I think some of this is maybe more than, maybe it's a step process too. Maybe it is that some, but there is some components of this that we need.
I can see some of these being softened a little bit, but we need design standards, we just have, we have a mess. We simply have a mess.
I agree. I think softening it in some would go a long ways, but I think we definitely need design standards. I agree with the mayor.
Absolutely.
The backside of fences on our arterials does not make our city a pleasant place to be.
Well, in addition, you've got some slipshod builders who say that they can't build a home if they can't add these things, they slip out of the affordable housing, we just can't afford to do it. It's just a lack of creativity. I mean, that's, in my opinion. Simple thing like a trellis over a garage door, how much does that cost? Maybe a few $100. Materials at most. Adds all kinds of, that's just a little creativity.
Well, the alternative too is you have a lot that you could build two houses on, and they're spinning the houses so that you're getting the side of the house versus the front of the house to the street, so they can get four houses in there. So they're, so they can make it affordable. Well, they just created two more lots. They ought to be able, in particular, the one house that's out on the arterial street, to put a few $1,000s into. They got two extra lots out of it, aren't they?
Why couldn't they put that first house facing the arterial street and let the other ones face sideways?
Wouldn't that fit?
Doesn't necessarily, yeah. Sometimes yeah, maybe I would hope that's an option, but sometimes it isn't, with the way they laid that up there, I don't know that they could have done that, but we got the back end of the house, facing the street. And if that's the way it has to be developed to make it affordable, then it needs to be at least attractive.
Well, I look at, drive by frequently that 4 or 5 house
Yeah.
development up on Tacoma Street. And when you look at the way those houses are placed, their backyards are 15 feet, maybe 20 feet max. You took that front house and spun it so that it would face Tacoma Street, let the other ones face the inward roadway. I personally don't think it's going to impact that at all, other than they're gonna look out their back window at the side of the house behind them.
Is that the
Today, they
one,
look out the side window of the house.
is that the one at the end of, would it be a Tacoma
It'd be
line?
difficult to incorporate.
Or,
It's between Kendall and Shrew on Tacoma. It's
I
across
think
from
it may
the
require
Acton
work
Club
in the
building.
Right,
design
right,
side
right.
itself for setback standards and whatnot.
So what Nick's saying there is, it may not be appropriate here, but what you're referring to is could be in the zoning, because we would need to tweak the setbacks. Requirements.
You look at all the high density around us. I mean, if you wanna see some high density, go into Paulsville, project area. That's high density, but it's done very well, very nicely. What we're experiencing here is, let's just grab a lot, stuff as many things as we can get into it, the heck with the aesthetics.
Well, and it's, what you see up there, and it's the little details. There's no T111 on those houses. It's lap siding. There's architectural features of the houses, and I think that's what we're asking for here is to have, in particular, the houses that are facing the street and that you see from the arterial street to have some architectural features to it.
Well, I think that some of the economic signs that we're dealing with right now is, more than ever, it appears that development may be coming our way, so I'd rather get out ahead of it. Protect some of this today, we could always come back a little bit, but within the next few years, our
keep in mind, we are getting a scope of work as a change order to our design guideline contract to look at the historic neighborhood, and so we may come up with more custom tailored standards for the old part of the city that are different than the new parts of the city, but for now, this will be something that would apply citywide, assuming that you want to approve a change order depending on what the cost is.
I'll paint my garage.
I would like to paint my white garage door.
I don't have a garage door.
Mine faces the alley.
Most might have to.
So, but you don't have to, it's one of your options.
It's one of your
Fine.
options, right. So my key comments are, I had a number of them, but one of the more significant comments was that the front porches, or front doors excluding garage doors, shall be protected by a deep recessed porch or other covered element. I think that should be a requirement. I think we should require that front porches be covered, just by virtue of where we're located in a rainy climate. I think it makes sense. I think it looks nice. And I think that's one that I don't think many people will argue with.
Well, how much do it cost? Are they gonna use a tarp or are they gonna actually build it? I agree with you, I agree.
Yeah, I think it makes
They're
sense.
creative, right?
And it may not be blue.
Brown tarps are available.
And another comment was, I think we were calling out parking spaces for 16 feet, and I think that was, or no, 18 feet, and I think
Yeah.
we should look at 20 feet.
That's no problem.
Because of the longer cars and trucks that are out there. And 20 seems to be a standard full-size parking space dimension anyway. The other thing that I couldn't get my head around was the 10% window requirement. When looking at some of those pictures, the black and white pictures, which show some of the problem construction, I couldn't tell if 10% was really a lot, or if 5% would work, or 7.
So when I initially developed these with the other jurisdiction that I worked for, that was the recommendation of the architect who helped us write these. I think you could set the limit at anything you want, and if you want to do like a visual preference survey, I can provide examples of what a house with 5% windows looks like, what, 7, 10, but it's really just determining what you think is appropriate for the community, and 10% was ultimately what we landed on.
And maybe that's only an issue with me, or questions with me.
So the real question is, do we want to take this bullet on the same night as we bring the other bullet forward?
I would really like to see this work down and softened before it's brought forward. We have some things in here, one of these options is distinctive paint schemes. Are we gonna define that?
I think that's one of the things that we can solve. I'm not.
I provided some language for that one in here.
And one of the, yeah, I haven't got that far reading your comments. And the other one is front door shall be designed as the focal point on the front elevation. Is it up to us to tell someone that their front door has to be the focal point?
And since I just wrote this a couple hours ago, the thought there is that on the skinny lot, 2-car garage and front porch, you have essentially a front porch and a garage, and that's all the width that you have on a 50-foot lot. And in the old days, you would have probably had some significant architectural windows in the front of the house next to a front door, and there's no garage to speak of. And so I think you could add that the front door or front windows could be the dominant architectural feature, although you'd have to distinguish between windows above your garage versus maybe the windows that are alongside your porch or otherwise on that part of the house. But I think you're emphasizing the occupied living space and not the garage as the focal point.
And again, that's because it's a small lot.
Yeah.
And again, in that same vein, under exterior materials, if it's stucco or other trowel finishes, it must be trimmed in masonry or wood. And, and I question that. I walked by, I counted 8 houses in McCormick Woods that are stucco or some type of material like that do not have wood or masonry trim. And these are very expensive, nice homes. So I question the need for that.
So it sounds like 2 of you have provided comments. You've got a matrix of the other comments, and
because I think there may be different attributes for each.
Maybe these guidelines are for small lot development.
I think at least on some of the provisions, it does distinguish between lot width in relation to driveways and garages. But we can look at stratifying that in the other sections as well.
Well, we also want to leave code that just kicks the issues to the bigger lots with those same builders that don't care.
Right, exactly.
Usually those builders that are building those houses though are smashing as many houses as they can into a small lots. Because they're maximizing profits.
Well, and with our density requirements, I would anticipate that most of the building or the majority of building we're going to be look at is going to be smaller lots.
So we're on to item 3 now, which is page 173 of your packet. It's tourism promotion strategic plan. Randy or Beth, who's going to lead this one?
I don't care.
So I'll do the introduction, but so basically it's just a tourism plan that Economic Development and Tourism Committee's been working on.
We're not hearing you real
Yeah.
good.
I think it's gonna take a minute to connect. Is that better?
Not so much.
No?
Why don't you come down here with us?
Okay.
Is that okay?
Let me see if this microphone's working.
See, we have to see if we like it.
Testing, hello?
Look at mine. Mine's working.
Hello? Maybe it's just me. Wow.
Maybe it's that small.
How much did we spend for these? Without the microphone.
I can hear you on the microphone, actually.
I don't think so. Answer.
She says she's under shaking her head.
I don't know. It's not picking up.
Is this picking up?
There's a delay, but.
Brandy, you can use mine.
Hello? Oh, okay, there, wow. This one works. Maybe, it was. Can you hear me now? Hello? All right, it doesn't like the stand, I guess. Okay. So, Economic Development Tourism Plan. Basically, this tool is to guide the Lodging Tax Committee members to So the first half of this plan basically just kind of sets out the guidelines of lodging tax. What is lodging tax? What is the committee members made up of? The uses of the revenue. We did apply some definitions. The majority of those are straight from the RCW. When we went through the committee, felt that we needed a definition of applicant, cooperative marketing, regional marketing, as well as what a tourist is. So those should be defined so that way it's, when it's referenced out through this booklet, you'll know who it is being applied to. We have the 5-year collection history, the allocation process, which is again outlined by our CW. We have the last couple years of allocations. Let me see. And then this page 181 is where the bulk of the committee kind of sat down and said, okay, we should have a value statement, a vision, a mission, what's the strategic commitments. And so I'm not sure if you guys had an opportunity to review this, but that's what the committee is proposing. I'm not sure how much you want me to go into detail if Beck wants to take over from here.
I will add some basic information in that the committee started, and Fred and Clancy were all part of this process. We, at the Economic Development Committee, we invited representatives from the Port Orchard Chamber of Commerce, the Port Orchard Bay Street Association, the LTAC Committee, Fathoms of Fun, and everyone was invited to participate in all of the meetings. Everyone was provided updates before every meeting of where we were in the document. So there was a lot of collaboration, there was a lot of discussion. We did not start with a blank piece of paper. We started with the tourism strategic plan from the city of Anacortes. And so when you look at the red line version, I think a lot of that still has some Anacortes. I mean, we were going through the Anacortes section on their plan.
One thing I noticed too, there's two different versions of this.
So
First one's at 175, and then there's a more recent iteration, page 186.
186 is the start of the red line.
Yeah, so that's your red line version versus going to its white.
Right, right. So there was a lot of, as I mentioned, a lot of collaboration, a lot of discussion on this. And then after we got through working on it, Fred convened the LTAC committee that's seated right now, and they reviewed it all. So it's been through a lot of hands to get here. Points that I would like just to mention is in the beginning when we had a value statement and a mission statement and some of those things, we may want to look at those again later. Again, what we did is we took Anacortes and massaged them so that they fit with what we were comfortable with. And I will say at the first meeting, that was what we spent all of our time on. As we go through this, the areas that I believe had questions on them is under the city leadership on tourism and culture. It would be on page 183. We indicated that the city leadership on tourism and culture, we would provide, our goal would be to provide guidance and support for the coordination of tourism promotion. And then we have a strategy, and we have two strategies. The second strategy is one that got some conversation, and that is that the council would offer LTAC an outline of preferred distribution awards, such as a certain percentage to various allocations, such as cooperative marketing, a percentage to regional marketing, a percentage to operation, and a percentage to first-time applicants. What we became aware of as we went through this is our LTAC process has been fairly closed in that we do it once a year. It's usually late summer, early fall. That's when the applicants are asked to apply. And not everybody knows exactly what they're going to do the next year. Your legacy events do, but we recently had a film festival downtown in Port Orchard, and I'm not sure it would have qualified because it was a for-profit, but events like that may not know in August or July of the preceding year that they're going to do that. So when we read through Anacortes and we saw that they set aside a certain amount for first-time applicants or events, it made sense to us to open up our process so that first-time people, their first-time applicants could apply anytime during the year so that they would have access to it. And we would have a bit of money set aside for that. And when you read this, and there's indicated here a percentage for operations. Operations includes administration, operations, and marketing. That is basically what the individual events are, or the operations that are taking place within our nonprofits to put on events. So the LTAC committee that Fred had chaired came back and offered us, rather than to put a percentage out there, to provide an outline of priorities for awards to increase tourism in Port Orchard. Awards would be prioritized based on the goal of increasing tourism through tourism promotion, regional and cooperative marketing, and first-time applicants. And what the committee had discussed with support was that we put out some percentages there. And as you go on through this, you will see that we did provide some percentages of allocations over the last few years to applicants. We also have a document that shows allocations by percentage of reimbursement type. So it's not that we have not done some homework on this. The other thing that when I listened to the LTAC committee that they were concerned with was because we were opening it up to first-time applicants that could apply through the year, they didn't want to have to meet several times. Council has never directed the LTAC committee when they meet or don't meet, and they had suggested some language that they wouldn't meet more than once a month, but I believe that would be hindering for them when they were doing their regular allocations, you know, in September. So because they will meet maybe even twice a week, you know, until they finish that process. So I had recommended to Brandy that we remain silent on how often LTAC meets or how they structure their meetings. It didn't seem necessarily appropriate to put it in this document. So with that, I would open it up to Fred or Clancy or anyone else that has questions about the work we've done.
I just think it's great that we're finally giving some framework to what we'd like to see. Because there's always this back and forth where in the middle of budget season, this is coming forward. It seems like at the 11th hour, and we don't necessarily get what the council's looking for. And so then it ends up going back, but how do they know what we're looking for without some guidance? And so this is for once, I appreciate the work you've done and give some framework and guidance to that committee.
So just really one comment. I love what you've done. I think this is absolutely just fantastic. I've been involved with LTAC from many different angles, and it's amazing to me, I believe, how much this is abused in many different jurisdictions. And if we go back to the Paramount, this is kind of the diatribe here. We'll get there in a second. We'll let it go into use of tax revenues on page 188. But you know, the way these funds are derived, 100% is by putting people in hotels, right? It's a tax on these people that are staying in hotels. And then I believe it's our paramount duty to reinvest those funds, to replenish those people staying in hotels so we can grow that fund. And so as I look at some definitions here, we go back to use of lodging tax revenues, either the word tourism, which is defined, or the word tourist, which is defined appears in A through D. And so if we go to those definitions, we start with tourism. Tourism, the definition of tourism is dependent on the definition of tourist. So we can almost not look at the definition of tourism and just really focus on the definition of tourist. And I think it's too vague. You know, tourist means a person who is traveling or visiting a place for pleasure. So if I leave my house and I go downtown for pleasure, I meet the definition of tourist. And so I think, you know, from my perspective as a council, is we're looking to protect the integrity of this fund and make sure, so to some extent, you know, I think we need a piece of this that it really needs to be focused on words like shall be, you know, putting heads in bed, shall be, you know, focused, at least a percentage of it. And so we don't take these funds and just take them all to a local community event, which is not replenishing heads and beds. Those community events are vital and important to our community, no question about it. But how do we protect the integrity from a legacy perspective if these funds aren't being, you know, as councils change, as something changes. So I think we may have a flaw in the definition
That
of
was-
tourist. And I think this RCW define tourist.
No.
They do not.
They don't anymore?
No.
I thought there used to be like a 60-mile, 50. Is it 50?
that's only for reporting requirements.
Right, and I want you to know that there was lengthy discussions on tourist. And we found a definition, Randy brought it forward, because we were trying to incorporate the over 50 miles one way in there. And,
I think it's recommended by MRSC.
right,
Too, just because of our proximity to Seattle, but my eyes, I guess, picked up, if we look at the definition of tourism, which says which may include sales of overnight lodging, what if we just said should?
I like it.
It
I have no
doesn't, it
problem with
doesn't
that.
say you have to, it's not shall.
Right.
But again, from the spirit of it, for future councils or future committees, that they're saying, we should look at this. Are we replenishing this fund to make sure that there's, you know,
agreed. One of the lengthy discussions that we had, or conversations that we continually had, was a lot of the tourist or tourism that we have in Port Orchard may or may not be overnight stays. It may be just on the front end or the back end of something else. And it's important, those people into our city are important to eat in our restaurants, to, you know, do other things. And I believe we have something like only 132 beds in Port Orchard. And so there's a real limitation as to how many heads we can put in, you know. But I have no problem with changing that word to should, or to promote more the out-of-area guest coming in.
right. Yeah, and the reality of our county is a huge number of our hotel rooms are booked by, it's business travel, right? It's per diem, it's government, it's the shipyard, it's the, you know, and so, you know, a lot of these funds are just occurring because of what's happening in our local economy, but as far as, you know, I guess hotel tax dollars being reinvested in tourism, if we're gonna call out the word tourism in every one of those segments, then I think we should have an emphasis that we're trying to pull in tourists that are staying here, replenishing those funds, but not restrictive, because these events, and like I said, people come for the day and spending money in our restaurants and shopping downtown, I mean, that's paramount for our small community, so not too restrictive, but just as our committee convenes, we should, at least that discussion should, so there maybe is a balance in the allocation of those funds, that would just.
You know, another factor that has to be considered is the marina. So you have people coming in with their boats, and there's a lot of economic value to having those boaters here. But do we count those as heads and beds? See? So that's a problem. Our measurement is a little restricted. And it's very important to have our marina filled, and it's, so that's a problem right from the get-go, because we've dealt with this before.
You know, one of the aspects in my mind, and I agree the ultimate goal is to get heads and beds, but that doesn't always, it's hard to quantify.
Absolutely.
Something that, to me, would do more in that direction is most of this funds are used for marketing.
Yes.
And if you define what is an acceptable market, for example, advertising in the Port Orchard Independent, to me, does not generate heads and beds. Advertising in Olympia Weekly does, or has a greater potential for something like that than just doing the Port Orchard Independent. So if we were to define what is an acceptable form of marketing, which is defined by distance from the city, but just to market it by putting a banner over Main Street doesn't really do much for
I
me.
think there's
as far as
percentages in this too.
Right.
When we talk to these percentages, we have, and these were just ones we came up with the percentage to cooperative marketing. And when we look at the definition of cooperative marketing, that means collaboration by multiple organizations which promote the city tourism outside of Kitsap County. And that's the group that does a brochure and puts it up and down the iPad portal. I think that's addressing what you're talking about.
It does, but
we had another percentage going to regional marketing organizations, and that's defined as marketing that promotes the entire Kitsap County or the entire peninsula. So that who's ever marketing the entire peninsula or the entire Kitsap County, that we're included, that we are paying our fair share of that marketing. And then we would do a percentage to the collaborative marketing that's outside of Kitsap County. And then the big bucket is operations, which is where they are used to getting their funds from. And then we would have a percentage for the first time. And I don't know, what those dollars would be. Those were just the 4 that we came up with in the committee. Is that how you heard it, Clint?
Yeah, and I love the idea of, you know, it's kind of like seed funding, right? I mean, we wanted to assist these different events and community events that they're great for our communities. And so I'd love to see a percentage of those allocated for the creation of new events versus only supporting the same event for, say, 20 years. You know, we're helping the event get off the ground, we're helping them stabilize, they can become self-funded. You know, that might take 5 years or whatever, but then hopefully we can use these funds then to help a new event, you know, become successful and be a part of our community.
I appreciate what you're saying, John, but I guess, you know, I have a little bit of trouble with that concept because you have an existing event, Fathoms of Fun, that can just keep building and building and building, and you've got the core that you then try to build more from, as opposed to spreading it. That's kind of the peanut butter approach, you spread it out to new ones who are just trying to get started. I appreciate they have the challenges of starting up with an event, but I don't know that we should restrict it that way. I think there is some advantages to helping even the existing ones get bigger and better. And I think if we put some of the limitations that we've talked about, I don't care if it's Fathoms of Fun or the Saints Car Club or whatever, if they can market further out their event, I think that's going to provide as much benefit for the city than putting as a bid.
Right, the other thing with this first time, if Fathoms of Fun, as an example, wanted to create a new event and not it be their parade or their float or, you know, the things they're asked for money now, they would be eligible for that first time money.
And I think the document provides a good framework. One of the things that came across, even though it's not in bold, is that we were encouraging more of the organizations to become self-sufficient. We weren't going to cut them off automatically, but have them think about how much are they depending on this for their operations as opposed to getting additional sponsorships. We were thinking, for example, the bands used to have more sponsorships, and they seem to rely on this to fund themselves. And I think the committee welcomed the framework, but the only concern, which is on page 183, is that they were concerned that with such specific percentages given for the 4 categories, it would be difficult for them to evaluate an application where the categories aren't as clear. For example, like what percentage of this application is for operations versus regional marketing. So what collectively the committee thought would be more helpful is if we said maybe one year we want it all to go for marketing as opposed to a strict percentage, because they were then thinking, how do we allocate the 20% of operations amongst all the applications?
I think that's to the applicant to apply for the appropriate bucket.
I guess they've had different categories. What's interesting is that we have captured the awards in the past, but I don't know that we've captured the categories that the awards fell into. And that might be another sheet. For example, how much of each year's went.
We've captured it by marketing or operations.
Okay, so it's like.
That raises an interesting question. Do we have any kind of reporting requirements for these funds so that we know how
This was,
they were spent?
this was proposed.
I know this is provided, but do we have anything historically that suggests what those numbers might be?
I'm going to talk again, because one of the things that was of concern to me last year when we approved the contracts, the LCAP contracts, we had some contracts that
I thought were very well put together and had no problems with. But we have other contracts, if I can find one quickly, that we just, Exhibit A was simply $16,000 for marketing, and that was all. And I had trouble with that as a councilman. I didn't know where those dollars were. So under the new proposal, they will lose the budget. You know, and a budget is just that. That's not saying they're going to spend a certain amount of money in a certain place. It's a budget, and this is, you know, how we anticipate that going. So I think that's kind of.
Do you envision that budget to provide at least some level of detail so that it's not just 30% of this is going marketing? We're back to the same problem we have today.
That's the hope. And I believe what we were going to do in the clerk's office was provide
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I mean, overall, this is incredible. I mean, for what this represents versus what other jurisdictions have is fantastic. I just want to make sure that in the spirit of this, we're making sure that we're protecting the integrity of this fund. Again, for example, in recent allocations, as recent years have been fairly stable, I would disagree with that. I mean, look at the swing. I mean, it's almost a 50% swing, 30% over 15 to 16, back up 15% in 17, and you know what I mean? And so I just want to make sure that we're cognizant of that. We're doing what we can to help replenish this fund, that's all I'm saying. I think the use of the funds has been fantastic, and these guidelines are great, but just to make sure that we memorialize the fact that, you know, this is a gift, and it's not guaranteed. If you're aware, local jurisdictions, no health, they can rally together, they can opt out of this, they can form their own deal, and take all these funds and do with what they want. And so I think we owe it to the hoteliers that, you know, they're marketing themselves to these people that are staying at our hotels, and they're placing this fee on their customers. And so I think we just need to be great stewards of the funds for these hoteliers to make sure that they feel like it's okay with them.
So the one critique I heard was adding a should instead of may.
Right.
Capture that, Brandon.
Also, there's just a little detail on page 179. You're talking about the term abode, it's abode.
Oh, it's probably the change of the page.
Yeah.
You know,
Second sentence.
ironically, the committee loved the
Under the
dragonfly
chart.
under the chair.
It's above.
Oh,
The committee welcomed the priority for new events and loved the dragonfly. Ironically, dragonfly does not appear to be eligible because they're not a nonprofit. So that was a concern because we believed that they would be. And apparently,
Well, if there was an avenue for them, they would form some sort of a
They-
nonprofit
that makes
to
sense.
do the promotion of the events. And there's money to do it, they'll do it.
Well, I liked it. I liked how you took the approach of developing goals and strategies and action items. And as I was reading through it, I thought, wow, this is really ripe for developing your metrics. And then the more I got into it, I saw that you were actually doing that, particularly with goal 4 and developing a template for reporting and tracking that information. So I like that. Oh, and so I actually like the green language when you had this work.
I think the direction was to try and bring this before the council for approval, adoption by a resolution. And I guess I'm just looking for guidance as if you prefer on page 183, the green language or the black language under strategy 1B. How should it be presented to the council for consideration? Percentage or
I think percentage just leaves, there's no imagination to that.
You like percentage?
in,
And the reason I do, because every year your applicants could be different, right? You could have
So I think the thought is that the council, every year when LTAC, once the dollars are projected as to what the revenue is gonna be for the next year for the applicants to apply for, when that's available, the council would make that decision is what percentage is gonna be held out for first time, what percentage do they want to go to operations, what percentage, and then once that's released and set by the council, those percentages are brought to the lodging tax committee for them to discuss and weigh the applications once they receive it. So it would be an annual basis, or now that we're a 2-year budget,
What-
every
what
2
would be
years
the
it'll come back to you
basis
guys.
For the council wanting to change that percentage? I mean, we don't necessarily see who's applying for it. We don't necessarily, I guess we could get an estimate on what the projected revenue is going to be for the following year. But if 10% is good this year for Brand X, what's gonna make us change it to?
Well, I think we're gonna develop these percentages, and if we need to tweak it, that's when we would bring it
Well, I
back.
like the idea of being able to go back and revisit it, but I'm just keying in on Brandy's comment of every year, the council's gonna revisit these percentages, and I'm not quite sure why.
We might in the first few years, because this is new, and we put,
I could understand that for maybe the second year to tweak what we did the first year if it didn't work out well, but my point is as we go down the road, hopefully this is gonna be in place for a while.
I was just
still
thinking
want
as
on
you
it
get more
anyway,
available, you may
after
want
we have
more
to act on it.
percentage,
But
but may
as
not.
more is available, just the percentage is gonna grow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The dollar amount's gonna grow based on the percentage.
Again, I think you could use the word should, that the committee should try to balance
Yeah.
the allocation of funds
I agree.
between operations, new events, blah, blah, blah. You know, so again, this is the spirit of what our city's trying to do, is to create a balance. You should allocate these things, you know, proportionately, or attempt to create some sort of balance.
my point is that should, it's gonna be there year after year after year.
Yeah.
And the percentages, once we figure out how we're gonna allocate it, other than tweaking it as we see that we need to, it's
When you
there.
know, if there's no first-time applicants, and we said we need to allocate 15% to first-time applicants.
Then the money would, because we held it aside,
So
it would be
throughout the
reallocated.
year,
The
March,
next- the
somebody
next-
could have an event, yeah.
Yeah, the next year, you would have a bigger pie to divide up. And maybe then we're gonna say, well, we didn't get any first-time
But then
applicants.
you've lost a year of bringing business to our community.
Yeah, don't wanna hold that forever.
Well, that's where your should
That's
comes
what
into
you
play.
should, right? So it
You
allows
should,
for
but if
some
you have
sort
no
of-
applicants for this, then
That's what I like.
obviously this is not
It's the
something we're
spirit,
gonna be able to
but
do.
it's an imperfect world. We don't know
Right.
until the requests come in of
Right.
what that
And the
looks like.
process isn't supposed to be that the council is dictating what it is ahead of time.
Right.
We're trying to give some guidelines.
Yep.
Or you are, you're trying to give some guidelines ahead of
That's
time.
why I
of
like the word
process.
should. It makes them
I
think,
agree.
You know,
are we attempting to create equity and balance?
there are some cities that actually take the LTAC funds and use them. And I read about cities that would actually build something to bring tourism in. And I cannot recall, because this is an article I, about 2 or 3 years ago. They built some kind of structure that had brought a lot of tourists in, but the city itself took
Well,
the
they create a
funds.
public facilities district, which enables them to capture those.
So that's a whole different way of looking at a use of
Well, there's been
LTAC.
some arguments that things like putting public restrooms on the waterfront help with tourism, because that's deficit that a lot of communities have. I mean, to me, that's kind of a stretch, but that has been an argument that's been presented before.
So it's not always just giving it away for marketing. Some cities have strategies. You know, the city is actually doing something.
But I think you have to have a defined project that meets the
Yes.
criteria
Yes.
that the city
Exactly.
agrees to, then you can allocate
consider balance.
Right, that was, this would be a balance.
If we don't, we can adjust it next year.
Well, then we'll put percentages to it.
Council doesn't have to approve it.
Very little percentage.
Okay.
So are we going to be asking for a report back from LPAC as to how did they allocate this? I mean, did they get anywhere near? What percentage did you allocate to here versus there? As best you can, recognizing that the applicants are gonna have a little bit of a gray in what they apply for. Maybe you ask the applicants when you're interviewing.
Part of the application.
Yeah.
What you, with different boxes to
It
it.
should, yeah.
Part of the application. About.
Good work.
The next one is not gonna take 20 minutes. So, Mark and I were planning on bringing an update on the marquee lights. Remember, we've got the Merchants Association with lights, string lights, back and forth across Bay Street. We determined that the marquee is not an option to do those two. We know, we believe though, on the south side of the street, the Quest utility poles could be an option for the Merchants Association to attach to. On the north side, they've got to most likely attach to buildings, but long term, we would like these on our street lights. The problem with that is our current street lighting plan calls for street lights only on the south side of the street and bollards on the north side of the street. Bollards won't work very good for stringing lights to.
Tall ones.
Tall bollards. So, Mark and I
Light on the top of it.
there we go. We'll pedal down off the other side. So Mark and I had scheduled a meeting that was supposed to happen this last week with PSE to discuss updating our lighting plan with them. So we believe we need lights on both sides of the street. And then from there, we would like to look at a phased implementation versus, it's gonna be $1 million plus project to do all of downtown and lighting. We did the undergrounding project where we've got 2 crossings. I think it's gonna be possible for us to go about this in 4 quadrants. And what that looks like, I'm not sure yet, but that's what we're gonna talk to PSC about. One, updating the plan and how can we go about doing this in a phased approach where we can budget, potentially quadrants of this, and go about that way. The other piece is, Titus is most likely going to start the demolition first week in July, his project, provided that Paul gets out of the building. And, they've currently got a 3-foot sidewalk. We're requiring a 6-foot sidewalk. There's 4 utility poles right in that area, and we're gonna meet with them about undergrounding that block right there too, and what that would involve in. So it's Schedule 74, where Puget Sound Energy pays for 60% of that if local government is requesting.
Is that going to terminate on the east side of Blackjack Creek?
No, just before it. On the west side, there's a pole that you would move the transformers over to, because it serves those 2 buildings over there on the other side of the street. So the first pole that would get left, in my mind, would be the first one on Titus's property, just on the west side of Blackjack Creek. Take it underground from there all the way to the hotel. And there's a pole right in the corner of the hotel. So we would get a little chunk of underground utilities right there. So we at least need to have that conversation before that whole frontage gets redeveloped, and then 5 years from now, go, but we're gonna underground this, and we're gonna tear up all of these new improvements that just got done. Let's find out if we can't hold up that project, but this is an opportunity that we need to discuss with Puget Sound Energy. So that meeting is on Monday, so I don't have 20 minutes worth of topic to discuss here because we haven't had a meeting yet.
I had one other thing. We talked about the Anderson Hill roundabout, and you wanted me to bring this up tonight, but we're at 60% design on Anderson Hill roundabout at Old Clifton. We've realized that the original contract did not include the preparation of a critical areas report. We've got a quote from our on-call consultant. I think it's $6,500, but it's not in this year's budget, so it's going to require a minor budget amendment. But because it's an on-call contract, I can go ahead and get them started on the work to avoid any delays while we amend the budget. I just wanted to Ted that that's okay to do, and we'll get that initiated. And it's our hope that, Mark and I have actually been talking about how much is in the McCormick Fund, the traffic impact fees that have been coming in, and it's possible this could be moved up as early as 2018, and definitely in 2019 if we want to do that. We were thinking that if somebody's already working on Tremont, we might get a more competitive bid if they could also bid on a project while they're mobilized rather than having to remobilize as a new project. So something to think about.
Yeah.
Just to retreat back to the lighting plan, when you say this could be $1 million project, as we talk about perhaps a master plan of all downtown, that this should probably be considered as part of that, number one. Number two, if we're gonna be attaching lights to buildings, that could be,
We won't, that's the first thing. We don't want to attach lights to buildings. We would love for the Merchants Association to get permission from the building owners. We're going to contribute to the project, but we.
no, I understand that, but I mean, if we're thinking things are gonna start revitalizing, the building may have to be torn down or something changing, how could that impact the overall lighting plan if we're adhering to a building that might have to be renovated in 6 months or
These aren't
something?
long-term lighting situations anyway. They're-
Well, and.
Well, I just heard $1
Right,
million
right.
lighting.
That's
plan.
right.
No,
No,
that's
it's
different.
$1 million, that's streetlights.
That's
Oh,
different.
yes, okay.
The lights, we're talking $7,000 or $8,000 in lights. And the strings will go to the buildings, and then we're gonna put streetlights in, and you can always make things shorter versus longer.
I think that I heard the same thing Sean did, and my question was, when we were talking about the street lights, how would those fit into a master plan before $1 million
Who knows what
is
these look
spent?
like, will those streetlights be in the exact same place they are today?
Right.
The other, I think, if we go about a phased approach, I think there's portions of downtown that are gonna be around much longer than other portions of downtown. And so the parts, where the bistro is in the movie theater, I don't see those buildings really changing anytime soon. That's probably a logical place for us to start with a lighting plan, because that building's probably gonna be there another 30 or 50 years, who knows? I mean, that's where we wanna put Publix dollar, where if there's a block, in front of Myries and the market that we would hope is gonna redevelop, we should probably go about that last, and hoping that's what we've been waiting for, the marquee to be dealt with by a developer. I don't know that we're gonna be able to wait for all of the marquee to be developed. I mean, I walk down there and where some of those notches are, you can stick your finger in it, because it's, so.
One of the other interesting things I was sitting here thinking about is, as you talked about Titus and let's, take advantage of their development. I think maybe we should be starting to look at the redevelopment of Bay Street, whatever that means, at least on the north side of Bay Street. And how does that redevelopment relate to our sidewalk? Because our sidewalk now is sitting on pilings, and we need to address that because we've,
It's actually not even sitting on pavement, it's cantilever.
well, it's cantilever, however, you could walk underneath the sidewalk, and that is what's causing us some challenges when we wanna put in streetlights or any kind of improvements, and I just think that, we should start addressing that now.
And I believe really the big picture is this master plan that we've gotta do.
I agree,
and I'm pushing
I
hard.
wanna try to get to it before they start rebuilding, and we go, boy, we missed that one.
Once or twice cut once.
Yeah,
So I'm pushing hard on getting property owners to contribute. One, they've gotta wanna participate in the master planning process, and two, contribute some dollars. It shouldn't just be the city's dollar, and I couldn't get property owners to do that, ahead of the last budget process. So I'm hopeful as we're doing our mid-biennial budget review and adjustments, that I'll have some commitments that will allow us to start that process, because that's what we need to do. It's all part of this master plan for downtown, for whatever that, or whatever the village looks like down there. That,
Did you have one other question?
okay?
So, HBA has been having different events, and the council, Cindy, we can't hear you. HBA is now called. Home Builders Association is now Kitsap Building Association. There needs to be probably an update on what the council could participate in with reimbursement. because an event that was held last year that was reimbursable is no longer reimbursable, and I don't know why. So I think we need to update. Is that right, Brandy?
Well, it's my understanding that they were a different organization or a subcommittee of a different organization.
Alan's not here to speak to it.
We just need to figure that out, because I don't think it is. I think they've always been the same. It might be a different umbrella of some sort, so we just need some definition on it, that's all.
I think that right now it's the annual meeting that's allowed, and this is just an option.
That's an option.
But in the past, it's been reimbursed, so what changed? I'm just asking.
You might have to ask it.
Okay,
That's people.
yeah, just asking.
So, was everybody good with that report?
Everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna get it initiated and I'll have Alan bring a budget amendment forward later this summer.
So you didn't get your head on?
I did not. And I didn't realize you weren't done with the
All heads, let's go.
marquee, so I